I think the UAE is striving to climb up the Global Food Security Index by 2051.
If you were to try to explain the fundamental story that pressure cooker is trying to tell, what's the problem?
I think it's about starting a conversation, honestly. It looks into how architecture can help us achieve a steady food intake or steady food flow into the country. It started by a very simple question by my mother, where do the blueberries come from? And so that instigated the idea of, let's look into the overlap of architecture and food production. I personally think it is a call for action a little bit, like let's all grow our own food, because I think it's very important. But also it could be a moment of reflection of where we're going with food production, because things are shifting in terms of the landscape, no pun intended, but also how people approach food production.
Welcome to the Afikra podcast. My name is Mikey Mehenna. Today on this series, we're posting an event in collaboration with NYU Abu Dhabi Institute. And this is a sort of a companion piece for a talk that's happening at the NYU AD Institute building on October 29th. And that talk is entitled Pressure Cooker. And it is about the 2025 National Pavilion that the UAE put together with none other than the curator, Azza Aboualam, who is an assistant professor at Zayed University and a co-founder of Holesum Studio. Azza, welcome to the series.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I want to start with a really basic question about pressure cooker. Even before I start talking about that, let me just ask you, what is a pavilion at the Venice Biennale? Like, what does that even mean to curate a show on behalf of the UAE as a pavilion at the Venice Biennale? Like, make sense of that series of words.
Honestly, it's a great honor, I would say, to represent one's own country at first on an architectural level. So I'm an architect, so representing my own country with an architectural problem is it's a big deal. It was a big deal, still a big deal for me. But I think it's about starting a conversation, honestly. Maybe investigating a phenomena or an ongoing issue that's happening in the UAE, or ongoing practices, and highlighting them through an architectural lens or context in this case.
So the pavilion is called Pressure Cooker. If you were to try to explain the fundamental story that pressure cooker is trying to tell to a teenager, for example, what story are you trying to tell? Like, what's the problem?
I would say it looks into how architecture can help us achieve a steady food intake or steady food flow into the country. So food security would be, say, the agenda that we had on the table that we wanted to investigate through an architectural lens. So that would be the main idea of the pavilion in a sentence.
Is that a problem that was provoked by your own work beforehand? Like, where did the idea really come from?
So initially, it started by a very simple question by my mother, where do the blueberries come from? Where we usually have fruits after lunch, and I'm tasked with getting these fruits and vegetables from the grocery store, and she would ask me where the origin is from. And I've started noticing recently, because I'm a foodie, where the food actually originates from. So there are tags on the fruits and vegetable aisles in the UAE, and I've started to notice that there's a lot of boasting of, made in the UAE, proudly local. And that day, the blueberries were actually locally grown, and she said there's no way, my mother said there's no way they were actually grown on shrubs that were foraged that you would get and then package. There has to be greenhouses involved. So where do these greenhouses go? What do they look like? Where do they exist in the UAE? And you don't really see them as you drive by unless you actually venture out into the farming zones, I would say. And so that instigated the idea of, let's look into the overlap of architecture and food production, hence the typology of the greenhouse.
Why is this an architectural problem as opposed to a problem that is involved with other disciplines?
So, within the context of the UAE, most of the year the weather is too harsh. Water is extremely saline, even if it's desalinated. Soil isn't as fertile as elsewhere. We don't have that much rain. So, growing all year round with a steady output to feed the local environment isn't as easy of a task as elsewhere. I would say with a steady water stream that's fresh, weather is actually conducive to growth of crops. And so we lean on architecture, hence the greenhouse as an architectural element to help us prolong the growing season. We do have growing seasons in the UAE, but they're very short usually. And they are more or less water intensive. They require a lot of care, of energy, of local expertise, and very restricted zones in the UAE. So using a greenhouse could help us not only extend the actual growing season, but also expand its context and use within the UAE.
If you were to like say on like a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a problem food security is right now? 10 being this is number one priority, urgent issue, we need to solve this right now, or nothing else matters. And 1 being like, this doesn't matter at all. This is a non-problem.
Um, I'm not sure if I can give it a number confidently, but I would say it's it is a big deal, I think, for the UAE, especially post-COVID or during COVID. There was an urgency in terms of realizing that actually I think, need to start to rely on oneself in terms of food security, having to investigate that issue further. I think the UAE has produced a lot of technologies, has investigated and invested also in these techniques. And I think it's only getting better from here. I don't know if it is in terms of being a problem, I would range that scale, but I think it is up there in terms of having food security as a national security agenda.
Is this like this I'm sure is not a unique to the UAE when you think about the region more broadly. Am I right in thinking that?
Correct. Yes. So the Gulf, obviously, we share the same climate. We share the same context in terms of desert and soil and not that much rain. Um, However, I think this will also be an issue when we looked into the project. This would be, unfortunately, a problem that would expand throughout the world because of global warming. So it's not just the effects of heat and actual, like intense sunlight that would ruin the crops or actually affect the input of or output of food, but also things like extensive flooding. That would change the soil structure. All of these things actually affect food production in terms of ultimate important crops like corn, wheat. All these will get affected because of climate change. So I think there could be a helping hand that's lent by architecture in this case.
I'd love if you can just sort of like explain a little bit what the actual pavilion looks like, why it looks this way, and what you're hoping people sort of come away with.
Yeah, so the exhibition itself, or the pavilion right now, as it is open until, I would say, the third week of November. So please go visit. It currently exhibits a variety of greenhouse assemblies, which is what we called the outcome of the project. So essentially what we did is that we looked into the archival research of food production and food security, and then we went into the field and studied these sites of farms and greenhouses, and then came up with our own kit of parts, which is breaking down the greenhouse typology into its essential architectural elements, which is floor, wall, roof, tools, materials, and shade. And we studied those also using the digital tool that was produced by Holesum Studio and their efficiency within the context. So then what happens when we change the roof? What happens when we extend the wall, etc.? And these were all essentially brought together in different ways. So in the exhibition, you see 3 different assemblies. So once you first enter, you see the shifted vault roof with 2 planting levels and a little bit of rammed earth that indicates the level of the floor. And then the center area, as you take a left is the gathering table, which is my favorite part of the exhibition. So it sits flat on the ground, has green shade net as walls, and then a fiberglass roof with a bargil as well, which is a different use of ventilation technology as opposed to the fan that's in the front. And then we have in the back the raised rammed earth as well as the CMU blocks that help regulate the internal temperature for more sensitive crops that you see in the exhibition, such as basil and mint, and polycarb walls, and then the actual vaulted roof with the polythene sheet. So these different assemblies show you different ways that these greenhouse typologies or formulations could take place within the UAE.
So do you think of this primarily as a research project? Do you think of it as as a public call to action? Do you think that you're ringing like an alarm? What do you think of this project?
I think it depends, obviously, on how you take it. I personally think it is a call for action a little bit. Like, let's all grow our own food because I think it's very important. But also, it could be a moment of reflection of where we're going with food production because things are shifting in terms of the landscape, no pun intended, but also how people approach food production. And I think that will only expand in terms of how we approach it, what we build to actually achieve those food security goals, and how will aridity expand, and then how do we then react to that in this
Yeah.
sense?
What do you think somebody like me or just like the general public most misunderstands about the what it takes for how many steps are involved? What are the costs, both financial, ecological, and otherwise? What are the costs that are being paid to get that packet of blueberries, that sort of pack of leafy greens, the cut of meat on my kitchen counter?
It's a lot. So it's not just obviously money, but also carbon footprint, right? So I think the issue that we found, for example, a bunch of things in response to that would be that a lot of people, for example, abandon their greenhouses in the UAE because they're too costly to maintain and to refurbish once they're destroyed by a storm or the sun was too harsh that summer, so the plastic started to wear off, for example. So people give up on
Before you keep
that.
on going, I want to ask, are is it common practice for a lot of people, personal, families, to have greenhouses? Greenhouses to me sound like a very industrial.
I've noticed that it's more common than I expected, honestly. Like I personally thought that once I go out in the field, all I'll find is palm trees, which is again a misconception. But we found a lot of greenhouses. And even if it's just as a simple shade net house, we studied that structure. And those structures are not only, some of them were brought in by obviously contractors and consultants that were fully fledged projects that were passion projects by the owners, but also some people actually built their own greenhouses by themselves and started to refurbish them, readjust them, change them within their own expertise and their fields. And I thought that was fascinating. With someone's backyard, they built their own passion project greenhouse, and that was more common than we expected to find.
Interesting. Okay, go back to the cost.
Yeah,
The
so
cost.
essentially, the one of the issues is cost. So obviously, people give up on their greenhouses. That's what we found. So they sit as bare bones, and people reinvest their money elsewhere, like the fellage or a flage system to irrigate, or traditional irrigation systems. We also found that it's obviously way more expensive to invest locally and buy. So if I were to go and buy the local blueberries, it'd be probably a little more expensive than if we were to buy them if they were imported. And so I think issues like this do impact food security goals. I think the local consumer wouldn't really know the difference, but obviously supporting local businesses, I think, is the way to go.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about this kit of parts. Is this sort of an innovation that you and the team came up with for this show, or is that an architectural term that I'm just not aware of?
It is an architectural term, but we use it as it's like saying that these greenhouse assemblies are Lego sets. So you could
Mm.
change, substitute, alter, replace as needed.
Why is that useful? Is it just like there's a natural life cycle for each part, and so you need to be able to replace? Like, why is it useful?
So what we found is that two things. The first thing is that greenhouses come as one. So they come as one full package, regardless of context. So that was an issue. So for example, what we saw in the field, like Chinese greenhouses or Dutch greenhouses, they're not for our context. They're not for our climate or our environment. So what we did is that we broke it down into its essential elements so that we can reformulate those accordingly. And that would go into the digital tool that would analyze their performance. So, for example, if we were to use a broken arch as opposed to a full arch, what would that give us in terms of how many days in a year it'll be above 30 degrees Celsius inside, which is not conducive for growth for most of the year. So we tried to bring that number as low as possible. So that's one example. The other example is that we also try to analyze their performance within context. So are they suited for the UAE? Where in the UAE it would be better suited? How do they perform based on contexts like Dubai, Sharjah, Al Ain, etc.? And all these would be compared within our data sets.
I'm sure you don't know these numbers off the top of your head, but what percentage of people in the UAE are living in apartments where this is like a non-issue?
So that was a topic that came up, or a conversation that came up multiple times within the project. So what we tried to do actually when we first started prototyping these assemblies, we built them at a smaller scale, so like a 1:2 or 1:5. And we thought to ourselves, why not actually put it in someone's balcony potentially, or having those on a rooftop garden? And I don't know the number of the percentage of people within balconies, but that could be a next phase of the project where things get smaller and more compact for those who don't have space.
Yeah. Is this do you feel like this started a broader conversation about food security in ways that you sort of surprised you?
I think so. I mean, there was a lot of, when it comes to the visitors to the pavilion, for example, visitors from Oman were giving me tips as to how to make it more efficient when it comes to building because they're very familiar with the form. Other issues or other conversations came up as to um, how to irrigate more cautiously, or how to use materials that could be recycled, for example. So there were a lot of conversations that helped sort of shape maybe a potential part 2 or phase 2 of the project.
I feel like to me there's like two parts to this. Were you mostly focused on industry or on individual? Like is the call to action like, guys, we need to first of all understand how industry works and how this food gets onto our plate, and maybe change consumption or change the policy, like advocate for different policies? Or was it we need to change the way our own personal engagement in growing things, and we all need to start growing things more often?
So the project within the scope of the exhibition and the research in general, it was mainly on an individual focus. So we were focused on the community side of things. Hence the gathering table where these greenhouse assemblies could usher in a new idea of social gathering, right? So you learn where your food comes from, how it grows, and then participate in that activity. But also within the scope of the book, we started to speculate as to how these could be expanded on an urban scale. So what happens within the neighborhood if someone's greenhouse not just works within their backyard, but also potentially could be integrated within a national park in the center of the neighborhood, or a public school, or even a governmental building on the side. So how could this usher in not just a new idea of social aspects and gathering, but also it could usher in ideas of learning where our food comes from and participating in this national food security
Yeah,
agenda.
super interesting. Um, I'm still, I'm like trying to understand who's doing this really, really well. Like in your research, have like the Japanese figured it out, or have like the Mexicans figured this out, or who's figured this out really that you turn to?
Actually, funnily enough, in the exhibition, the Mexican pavilion that we share a border with is also doing an investigation of agriculture, but that's a very different take on things. But within the scope of the UAE, I would say ICBA is doing amazing things. So Dr. Tarif Azza has been a great guide in the project. Dr. Shuman Mohammed from Silal has been also doing amazing things. We went to see the blueberry greenhouses there, so that's awesome. He was very welcoming and very informative. Dr. Majid Al Qasmi, for example, from Soma Mater, had a lot of insights as to how food security, um, I would say, is an ongoing subject within the region. But we also see local farmers, right? So those farmers that have been growing wheat since 1960 and 1940, for example, and have passed on these learnings generation after generation without a greenhouse or with the use of a net house. So it's a very wide scale of high tech and low tech, and I think we try to bridge both.
Yeah. Do you have a sense? Could you explain like what food groups and what like foods in general are being grown? Like, what is the food infrastructure in the UAE right now? Like, what's actually being grown? Where is it being grown? What's being flown in?
So Al Ain has always been known to be very fertile. So you would see a lot of crops being grown in Al Ain. And actually, interestingly enough, when we studied the greenhouse assemblies within the context of Al Ain, we found that the best performance would be in Al Ain. Ras Al Khaimah has a lot of farms, but actually, I would like to shed some light on Sharjah. That's been doing really a lot of new projects, such as the wheat farm, the poultry, new greenhouses are being built, the dairy farm. There's a lot that's going on in Sharjah. So I would say it's slowly growing, but it's scattered, I would say, around the UAE. Hatta has a lot of fertile soil that we saw as well. Masafi al-Fujera, for example. So it's scattered, fruits and vegetables, cattle, we found livestock, and wheat and dairy in Sharjah at the moment. Obviously, aside from an Ain project, that's an
Yeah.
older one.
Cross border, is there sort of like regional knowledge sharing, solidarity, even sort of like South understanding? Like these are obviously, this is a national project, but I often think like Haram when like there's so many people who are going through the exact same thing. Like, are you speaking to people in like Upper Egypt? Are you like, there's just clearly so many people who are dealing with
I
this.
think the Gulf mainly was our main point of contact. So people from Saudi, people from Oman. Oman was a huge help. Kuwait also. We've spoken to visitors to our pavilion from Kuwait. Bahrain as well. So it's a lot of Gulf focused. I think we slowly approached Singapore and the beginning phases, but they have a lot of fresh water. So it's a slightly different problem. But it's the same when it comes to import as
And
well.
like nonstop rain.
Non-stop rain. So mashallah, knock on wood, they do have a steady stream of water.
Yeah. What is currently being made? Like, has it gotten to the point where like tomatoes are in the bag? We make all our own tomatoes. Like blueberries, yeah.
Cucumbers are, I would say, 90% of the greenhouses that we saw in the summer were cucumbers. So I think we're covered. It's a very adaptable to heat. It could grow well in greenhouses even when it's really hot outside, so it's not that sensitive. I think dairy we're covered. Poultry we've been covered since 1985 as per the archival research, so I think we're good there.
Why 1985? Should have been 1985.
It was a huge headline in Al Ittihad newspaper saying the UAE has achieved food sufficiency when it comes to poultry and eggs. So it's been ongoing.
But was that like
since
a
then.
national agenda?
I think since Sheikh Zayed came into presidency, there was a lot of oil revenue that was funneled into food security projects. So irrigation projects, dams as well. There were a lot of farms that were refurbished in Al Ain to provide that sufficiency. So one of those was poultry. Al Ain dairy farms was started then. So you start to see those mega projects start when the oil revenue was funneled into food security projects.
Is it still a national priority, like a major national priority?
It is, yes. So I think the UAE, as per the research, is striving to climb up the Global Food Security Index by 2051. And I see a lot of that being obviously the supermarket and the grocery stores are evidence of that. But also, you see a lot of people start to not just invest, but also realize the importance and start to realize the um, impact of how many projects are actually feeding us from within. We don't have to import as much of it anymore.
Yeah. Um, I want to talk about this cookbook.
Yeah.
So one of the publications, there's a publication that's sort of associated with this. Explain what, explain this idea. So it's pressure cooker recipes and architectural cookbook. Um, Tell me what this is all about.
Yeah, so that is, I think, my personal baby of the project. So the cookbook, which is the catalog slash publication of the pavilion, I approached it as an architectural cookbook. So when I first approached the project, I sent out a list of ingredients to each contributor. So they were sort of encouraged to look into how they gathered these ingredients and how they were used later on to create a meal. So whether be it they were forged, shared by a neighbor, bought from the supermarket, grabbed from their fridge. And then they were invited to look into the architectural spaces that ushered them through this gathering process, and then they would write a piece in response. The book is divided into 5 main chapters and 2 supplementary ones in the beginning and end. So the first one looks at historic slash archival research of food and architectural overlap. The second looks at fieldwork and its different approaches. The third one looks into the technical aspects of a greenhouse. And then the fourth one looks at the urban scale of food production and its impact on the urban fabric and future speculations. And the last one is photo essays of not just greenhouses that we've seen in the field when visiting and documenting and studying, but also what food actually is grown in the UAE and what was given to us by local farmers when we went to the farms.
Yeah. Um, what has been your experience with local farmers when you were going to speak to them? Were they resistant, reluctant? Um, were there techniques and practices that surprised you?
I would say the majority were very friendly. I think going to these farms and just asking about the farming techniques, some of them were hesitant or skeptical as to why you're asking me these questions, while others were very proud of their makeshift greenhouses, like someone made their own greenhouse that didn't work first for what he intended to do. So he made it into a makeshift greenhouse to dry his dates to feed his chickens and cows, but also to sort of make an underground water pool to grow azola, which is also another fodder type. So that was one very interesting moment. There were also the fields of passion fruit and corn in Liwa that we saw. That was fascinating. The blueberry greenhouses, obviously, Dr. Shamal Magassar, he was great with the visits going back and forth in Al Ain. And so I think seeing these in context is very different. When you read about them, when you see them in photos, it's very far removed, but there's actually like a smell, there's a sound, there's texture, there's a lot of life to them that is very far removed once you just read about their technicalities, right? There's a life to them.
Yeah. So if you were to take like think about the next 25 years, um, do you do you think there's an actual pathway to the point where there is like food independence? Is that even a concept that is worth thinking about and worth pursuing?
I think so. I think obviously it requires a lot of investment financially and time and care. But I honestly think maybe that might be the sort of idealist in me, but I think it's doable. I think there is a path down the line that could at least achieve a large percentage of food sufficiency within the region and especially the UAE.
What are the sort of and maybe you don't know this off the top of your head, so it's totally fine if you don't. But what are some of m- the important sort of markers? Like if you're like if you're importing 90%, that's a problem. If you're importing 50%, that's a problem. Are there specific like levels to get to? Like if you depend on your poultry, you're fine. Poultry is enough, and then you can. Everything else is a nice to have. Like how do people who study this stuff think about what food independence actually looks like? There's clearly levels to it.
I think from what I've gathered when it comes to the conversations that we've had, it's a lot of yield and risk and financial investment versus what yield you get. Um, so that was a huge topic that we've come across. Less so as like saying, oh, we have our income of cucumbers, we're good. But it's more of financial investment, but also using what we have to grow new crops. Like for example, in Ikba, they're using saline water irrigation. So what does that look like when it comes to the future of food? Can we, for example, they were experimenting with quinoa. So will that change our diet? Will that make us food sufficient? Right. So these are different approaches to the question. I guess opened up other venues of investigation in our
Yeah.
case.
Did you take your mom to the blueberry
I
farms?
did not, no, but I
Yeah, I
brought back some.
bashum. What you're not gonna?
I brought back a lot.
You photo evidence. You need to prove it to her.
Yeah, I need to. She does. She would probably still not believe me.
It's funny. So we have on screen this like archival footage. I'm curious how much of the supermarkets, how much have supermarkets changed in the UAE in the last 50 years?
A lot. So you see, for example, the photo on the bottom left, on the left page,
Yeah,
is Souk El Jubail in Sharjah when it first opened. And you can
yeah.
see, yes, there was actually a lot of seasonal and local things because that's how we ate back in the day, right?
Like what? Like
When we did.
give us some examples of like what those seasonal local things would have been.
So, dates obviously are a huge thing in the summer. A lot of fruits and vegetables thrive in the winter. So, when you flip through the book, you'll see a lot of, for example, watermelon in February, which is ironic because it's a summer fruit. Sweet potatoes are big. What else? Yeah, we said cucumbers in the summer. Leaves like cilantro and mint, these are also, depending on the region, grow in the summer mainly and thrive in the winter. Like cilantro, we can't find in August, but it's everywhere in February, for example. So you can see also the way it's exhibited or displayed, right? So people would gather, pick up their food. Back in the 18 and 1900s, it was dried fish and dates, right? As per the archive. We did also find evidence of custard apple in 1850 in Al Ain, which was very
In
interesting to find.
1850?
Yeah, and citrus
Interesting.
groves in the 1600s in Masafi, which was fascinating. So there is evidence to things growing in the regions, just finding that evidence and having to extend that lifespan of the fruits. But obviously, now supermarkets are fully enclosed, air conditioned, fridges and freezers, right? And are a thing also when it came to the changing landscape of food in the UAE, right? Having these brought in as home appliances also changed how we eat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everywhere, obviously, like refrigeration everywhere changes things. I really wonder, like specifically in the last, a lot is made of the amount of changes in the last 30 years in the UAE. When they think about sort of like the mid 90s to now, the massive migration, influx of people, has that also I mean, has that also affected food systems in general? Like the amount of people who are here, obviously, the demand on the amount of food, the amount of water. This is like also a massive logistical and architectural challenge.
Definitely. I think it was an interesting insight with Dr. Majid Al-Qasmi from Soma Mater when we spoke to him about food security. And he said, obviously, that is a very, I don't want to put words in his mouth so that I remember the conversation correctly, but food security is a very subjective term when it comes to defining it within the UAE. And he said, in his opinion, I think, from what I remember, is that food security within the context, seeing that a large percentage is a population that is coming in to live in the UAE, food security would be achieved by making sure the ingredients for biryani and karak are in the UAE. So having that being a definition of food security is a very different take on if you speak to someone else. If I speak to my mother, will probably be very different, as opposed to maybe my younger cousins, right? So there are so many, I would say, subjective ways or takes on what food security is, and that would then inform what food products are being grown in the UAE, and how do we define food security then within this context?
Yeah. Okay, last question before we wrap up. Since you are also an educator, what are some books or people that people should look up when it comes to thinking about, wanting to learn more about food security in the Gulf or in the region?
Not to toot my own horn, but this book, obviously the one that you see on the screen, but also there was a book that was very interesting. I'll pull up its name so that I don't forget its specific name. It was Food Security in the Middle East. That was a very interesting book that we came across. Obviously, I mentioned a bunch of figures already.
Can you
Dr.
mention them
Shaman.
slowly and one by one, like
Sure.
what do they do?
Dr. Shaman Mohammed from Silal, which is a big, I would say, company that invests in food security locally, not just output of food, but also actual greenhouse technology. And it's, I would say, reformulation, reintegration within the context of the UAE. Dr. Tarif Al-Zaabi from ICBA, which is a huge institute that looks into the international, I'm blanking out on the name, but International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, that looks into irrigation techniques using salt water, but also, for example, the quinoa crop, I would say, techniques that was looked into. Dr. Majid Qasmi from Soma Mater that writes about food security in the region. And honestly, just speak to your grandparents. They probably know a lot about having a green thumb and growing their own food within the context of the Middle East.
It's funny. I feel like um, when I think about food security and I think about my grandparents, a huge part of it is food waste. So it's like not necessarily securing more food. Maybe it's not about securing more food, but actually wasting less food. Is that something that's part of the policy conversation as far as you can tell?
Food waste, yes, it's part of it for sure. We didn't look into it within the research, but it is a huge part. Yeah, we also see a lot of campaigns, for example, like Ramadan or around iftar time, right? There's a lot of food waste issues. So you see these campaigns come up even more seasonally, but they are an ongoing issue for sure.
Yeah. It's so funny. Can I say one last thing about the waste thing? Because I was thinking about this yesterday. I was in Dubai and I ordered a lahm ajin, okay? And it arrived at where I was staying with like box on box on box on box on like insanely beautifully laminated bag and crazy box with tons of laminated cardboards and
Yeah.
insane waste. The waste is crazy. It was as if I was ordering a wedding cake.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And I see this all the time. And I wonder if there's like, because like, it might sound like I'm not talking about food. It might sound like I'm talking about packaging. But bil akhir, I'm talking about investment. And I'm talking about like the cost of dealing with the waste, cost of creating all that stuff, and um, and all those resources could be dedicated to making sure that there is like locally grown lettuce.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the same people who are talking about food security are also talking about the sort of peripheral waste around in the F&B industry more broadly.
I honestly haven't realized it until I was in the US and I was staying with a friend, and my friend's mom was saying, "Oh, we're going to order in that night." And And then the food comes in. It was Thai food and it was a lot of packages. It's like, oh, it's just so much waste. And I never really actually thought of it until then because I'm so used to just ordering on my phone and grabbing food on the go. But I did have, speaking of being an educator, I did have a project, a senior student do her senior project on food waste. And she investigated like local habits. She looked into what food waste looks like and having to do a furniture piece out of that food waste, which was interesting. But I think maybe then packaging could be another thing that a student could look like at, right? So what happens to the packaging afterwards? We do have a huge box, for example, at home that's just empty packages from food takeaway boxes. And yes, you use it, you reuse it, you gift it, you put things into like, you put food and give it to people. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's a lot. It's a lot
It's
of,
so
even
much.
the plastic wrapping. I started to notice that it is starting to shift towards paper to be more sustainable. But even then.
Yeah, it's the quantity. It's the sheer just quantity around. And I think part of it is like, is that because food is so, there's so much branding around it that's like, yeah, let's just brand this like crazy. And then you end up creating so much waste. It's insane. And the only solution, it's really the only policy solution where the F&B industry like has to get taxed or penalized for creating so much waste.
I think someone should come up with an innovative way to address this problem.
Yeah. Okay, yalla. Next time.
Yalla. Next project.
Next project. I'm into it. Azza, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun. If people are interested in attending the event, it's happening if you happen to be in Abu Dhabi, it's happening on October 29th. So that's a Wednesday at NYU Abu Dhabi. So thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.